Conflict is what occurs when discordant ideas are expressed or experienced between two interdependent parties. Conflict can be seen in everyday simple disagreements in the workplace to the wars being waged overseas. Conflict is something that everyone will deal with at some point in their life, so it's best to understand it and the different ways to deal with these encounters in a more positive way. Let's talk about 3 common myths regarding conflict. First, we have the myth that conflict is harmful and should be avoided. While conflict is not necessarily something that one wants to deal with, conflict in groups can help people to really discuss multiple sides of an issue and form educated opinions based on different facts presented during the duration of the conflict. This can help groups form a more solid and educated decision and be more satisfied with the outcome. Another common myth is that conflict represents a misunderstanding or breakdown in communication. This is not always true. Conflict can occur over having limited resources, having varying ways of accomplishing your goals, and as we have learned in previous classes, values and goals can be different based on culture and how an individual's norms vary. For example, say we have a businessman from the United States go to Italy to discuss a proposal with an Italian counterpart. In the United States, we tend to get right to business and get it done. In Italy, this would be taken as rushing and as a sign of weakness and would offend the Italian business person. Another common myth about conflict is that conflicts can be resolved if parties are willing to discuss the issues. As we discussed above, sometimes people will have different values and morals. One may not be able to change a value that has shaped someone's life just because it is not something that they necessarily agree with. Let's discuss the different types of conflict. The first type of conflict we are going to discuss today is substantive conflict. Substantive conflict is conflict resulting from disagreements over ideas, information, reasoning, or evidence. This type of conflict is work-related and is the type of conflict that can increase the overall productivity of a group because the ideas are evaluated and discussed on their merits using logic, reasoning, and examples. An example of substantive conflict was presented when one of our group members brought up her work hours. Her boss wanted to mandate for all employees to be at work by 8 a.m. For her, this was a problem due to childcare constraints. Instead of arguing about it, she presented the office statistics to her boss showing the higher call volume of the afternoon time frame, and she asked her boss to stay later in the afternoon. This was helpful to both parties because there was typically more calls in the late afternoon and thus a higher need for someone to be there at that time. They were able to come to an agreement after presenting different ways of approaching the problem. Another type of conflict is affective conflict. Affective conflict is conflict resulting from personality clashes, likes, dislikes, and competition for power. This type of conflict is seen as a more personal type of conflict between individuals. Last, we have procedural conflict. This type of conflict results from disagreement about how to do something. Procedural conflict is considered a type of substantive conflict. Instead of discussing the whys and the whats, procedural conflict is more about the how should we do it. Let's touch on the communications-mediated conflict versus face-to-face conflict. In today's modern world, we have to face that members of groups can go online to discuss things. This can lead to different kinds of conflicts for groups. Face-to-face, groups have an easier time getting to know one another and have the personal accountability to one another. This can be negative or positive, as we saw in week 1's discussion.
It's well known that people say or do things in cyberspace that they wouldn't ordinarily say or do in the face-to-face world. They loosen up, become more uninhibited, and express themselves more openly. Researchers call this the disinhibition effect. It's a double-edged sword. Sometimes people share very personal information about themselves. They can reveal secret emotions, fears, and wishes, or they can show unusual acts of kindness and generosity. On the other hand, rude language or harsh criticism, anger, hatred, and even threats.
Online groups tend to have more negative reactions because they do not personally know someone and are less inclined to care as much about an anonymous person than someone sitting next to them in a conference room. Let's move on to some different conflict management styles. We have 5 different conflict management styles to discuss: avoidance, accommodation, competition,
compromise, and collaboration. Avoidance is when a person is unwilling to engage in conflict with others. Accommodation describes someone who is willing to engage in conflict but gives in to the other person. Competition is a conflict management style that shows a preference for an individual coming out ahead at the other person's expense. Compromise is a style showing a preference for giving a little and gaining a little to manage an issue. Collaboration is a conflict style that shows a preference for working towards a solution that pleases both parties. As stated in our class text, no single conflict style is always best. Each one can be evaluated not only in terms of its effectiveness, but also in terms of its appropriateness.
There are many different ways to approach conflict resolution, but the one that we are going to discuss today is nominal group technique and how we implement it. The nominal group technique is a process that alternates between individual work and group work to help a group hear from every member when discussing a controversial issue.
There are 8 steps to the nominal group technique. Step 1. The problem, situation, or question is stated clearly and concisely. During this step, identify what the problem is that needs to be solved and only the problem. Step 2. The coordinator asks participants to generate a list of the features or characteristics of the problem or question. Step 3. The coordinator gives the group 5 to 15 minutes to work silently. Doing this gives everyone an opportunity to come up with his or her own unique ideas and solutions to the problems presented. Step 4. Each suggestion is listed and recorded in round-robin fashion on a chart visible to all members. As we saw in Week 2's discussion, there are many people who are high talkers as well as low talkers. This encourages and allows everyone to get out the ideas that they have come up with. Step 5. Members clarify the items but do not yet evaluate them. This gives everyone time to thoroughly explain their solution and others to ask information about it. Step 6. Each person chooses his or her top-ranked item. This identifies what is important to each group member. Step 7. The group engages in full discussion of the top-rated items. This should be an involved discussion with all members of the group evaluating each item. Step 8. A decision is reached after the discussion in number 7.
We discuss myths about conflict, types of conflict, conflict in online venues versus face-to-face, conflict management styles, and we also discussed a conflict resolution approach. Hopefully, through today's lesson, you have learned some valuable lessons and will be better able to manage conflict in your own life.